George Galloway and the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
I swear if Nicolasturgeon had a driving license, she'd have done an O.J. Simpson when the cops came calling for her today. As it was, she'd only passed her theory test, not yet the practical, and therefore had to tamely submit to arrest by arrangement. You know, the kind of thing cops routinely do. Anyway, she's been released without charge, pending further investigation, just like her husband, Peter Murrell, and just like the SNP's treasurer, whose name now escapes me. Because like the deadly upas tree, nothing grew underneath the Murrell-Sturgeon duopoly. They were the Nikolai and Elena Ceausescu of Scottish politics. Now both of them are under further investigation. A report will be sent to the Procurator Fiscal, and the laws in Scotland, though I'm not there, will be made on this show this evening. In other words, proceedings are live, and therefore comment is extremely limited. But I can assure you nothing I have said in the last minute or two transgresses those laws in the slightest. We know that Boris Johnson has badly let the side down. We know that he has fallen far below the standards expected in public life. We know that because the BBC showcased Alastair Campbell, Tony Blair's former spin doctor, to tell us. A Prime Minister elected by 14 million people, thanks in part to the assistance of all of the liberals and progressives who did so much to destroy the possibility of Jeremy Corbyn being the Prime Minister, only to spend the next years telling us that the Boris Johnson that they facilitated into power was the worst thing since Mephistopheles himself. I'm in the glad position of despising all of them. But I'll tell you what, 14 million people voted for Boris Johnson and 0 people voted for his nemesis Rishi Sunak, and an alliance of the Sunakists, if such a thing can possibly exist, and Harriet Harman, no less, and the Blairites of the British Labour Party has done for Boris Johnson, but for how long? I predict he'll be back. I predict he'll topple Rishi Sunak. And not as Sir Rees-Mogg just said, after the next general election. I predict before it, in mid-Bedfordshire, the seat vacated on the same day as Boris Johnson resigned by his chum Nadine Dorries. What could be a more comfortable constituency for Boris Johnson than the middle of the bed, with a couple on either side of him, if you get my drift. And we'll be talking to the legend that is Seymour Hersh, and the legend rapidly developing legendary status Adil Raja. A Soldier Speaks, coming up very shortly. Stay tuned. It's the mother of all talk shows.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway, the mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway, the world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
A helpful colleague has put up the name Colin Beattie, SNP Treasurer. He or she does not know that I oftentimes forget someone's name as an affectation, just as a kind of humiliation to the people whose name I pretend to have forgotten. I didn't mention Colin Beattie, whose name I almost forgot again there, because nobody in the country knows him, but everybody in the country, and indeed the wider world, where she was all set for a glittering career as a bureaucrat in the European Union or even in the United Nations. But not now, Governor, not now at all. Not just the lustre has fallen off the Sturgeon Murrell dynasty that established absolute power in Scotland, but the votes of her party, the SNP, are melting away like snow off a dike, as we say in Scotland, and deservedly so. Who knew that a party founded by fascists in the 1930s would end up wrapping itself in the LGBTQ plus two-spirit or whatever else is now in the acronym as a funeral shroud? Their wokeness done for them. Their predilection for placing men in women because the men, after they had committed, in many cases, their heinous sexual offences against women, decided that they were, in fact, women and must now, henceforth, be incarcerated on a prison estate where some of them would go on to enjoy their perverted predilections still further behind bars. You couldn't make it up, but you didn't need to. The Scottish government of the SNP and their gardening section, the so-called Green Party that doesn't give a toss about the environment, cares a little bit about Scottish nationalism and a lot about transmania. Or, as Joe Biden put it earlier this week, maybe we'll show you the clip, Joe Biden boasted that he was proud to have lifted the ban on transgender Americans. I think transgender is a phrase that is born. I think transgenderism is a phrase that will live on. Transgenderism. In fact, we've got it now. Let me hear it. I can't...
As Commander-in-Chief, I was proud to have ended the ban on transgender Americans serving in the United States military. As Commander-in-Chief, I was proud to have ended the ban on transgender Americans serving in the United States military.
Well, the foes of the United States are no doubt quaking in their hobnail boots at the transgender Americans unleashed by Joe Biden in the NATO army. But my point is, the Scottish Nationalist Project has been murdered, not because of its nationalism. There will always be 25 or 30% of Scots who would like their country, my country, to be a separate state, to build a wall, to coin a phrase, along the border, providing jobs for German Shepherd dogs and border guards and the like. But most Scots are far too canny to go along with that. But it wasn't the nationalism which done them in. It was the wokeism. That and the gangster-ish tactics of the Sturgeon leadership towards not just their internal dissenters at this time, but towards her predecessor, Alex Salmond. Now, I disagree with Alex Salmond very profoundly on many things, but he is a friend of mine, a former parliamentary colleague of mine of many years standing. And the people around Nicola Sturgeon, they know who I mean, and very few others do know who I mean. And I'm not legally allowed to tell you who I mean. But the people around Nicola Sturgeon tried to fix it for Alex Salmond, a very overweight man of the same age as me, to die in prison behind bars on sex charges that were thrown out by a majority female jury in the Scottish High Court. And then the Sturgeon administration began making the necessary steps to abolish juries in sex charges. That's the kind of people they are. So I will myself never forgive them for what they did to Alex Salmond. I am glad that the SNP is now crashing and burning. But whether or not she is guilty of whatever it was she was arrested for today, that will remain a matter for the legal process. Let's hope, for her sake, it's a better legal process than the one faced by Boris Johnson, a man elected in 2019 by 14 million people, including people who had never voted Conservative before, and who racked up an 80-seat majority in the House of Commons. By today's standards, a landslide victory. He was not very long in the door when the people that he clasped to his breast were intriguing to get him out of the door. Not just out of the door of number 10 Downing Street, but out of the door of Parliament itself. Now, one part of me says it couldn't happen to a nicer fellow. I find Boris Johnson amongst the most repugnant of all the human beings it has ever been my, privilege to know. I have known many. I have known many in Parliament. I have known many loathsome people in Parliament. Boris Johnson is right up there in my top 10 of the most loathsome politicians I ever came across. There is no lie that he has not told. There is no commandment that he has not broken. There is nobody that he has not cheated and deceived. There is nobody that he has not stabbed in the back. But none of that, dear viewer, is the point. He was the elected Prime Minister of the country, and he was removed by the blob. And it was a blob that deployed tactics even more, if such a thing were possible, despicable than those of Boris Johnson himself. Rishi Sunak was elected by nobody as the British Prime Minister. Not even a single Tory MP cast their vote for him to be the Prime Minister. He is an illegitimate Prime Minister, and I could use the colloquial word, except he's too ridiculous for that colloquial word. He's not a B. He's a clown, a C. I saw a picture of him yesterday at an American baseball game, striding purposefully, all 4'11" of him, to shake hands with a large American eagle. Not a real one, but a stuffed one. And I thought to myself, is this what Britain has become? Is this the country that used to be known as Great Britain, governed by a usurper? A man not even fit to sit on the knee as a ventriloquist dummy for Joe Biden? Joe Biden, folks, who told us when Rishi Sunak, or Rashid Sunak as he called him, go figure, this guy is the new Prime Minister of Britain. He has allowed our country to drift onto the shoreline of a devastating Third World War. Boris Johnson might well have done the same, but could well at least have claimed that he was the elected Prime Minister. When a usurper takes his country to the brink of ruin, economic ruin, and military destruction, what can one say except this man does not represent me in any shape or form? In fact, does not represent anybody. If he had gone to a ballot against anybody at all, he would have been defeated, even in the ranks, perhaps particularly in the ranks of the geriatric golf club gin and jag boars of the Conservative Party. They think they should still be ruling India, not that a little runt of Indian extraction should be ruling them. But he's there, and he has fixed it with the assistance of the kangaroo court, though that is an insult to all kangaroos, of the so-called Standards and Privileges Committee, at the hands of which I myself have suffered. It was a kangaroo court delivering a verdict not on behalf of itself, but on behalf of the supporters of Rashid Sunak and Keir Starmer and the Blairites of so-called New Labour. It was to rid themselves of this turbulent priest, because you haven't heard the last of Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson is still a very considerable and formidable political figure, a worthy foe in political terms for anyone who has to fight him. And I predict his return. Now, nobody else seems to have grasped this possibility, so I may be about to surprise you. Many thought it strange that his amanuensis, Nadine Dorries, joined at the hip with Boris Johnson, hopefully out of range. Nadine Dorries resigned her seat in mid-Bedfordshire on the same day that Boris Johnson resigned his, and went off apparently into oblivion. But what if Boris Johnson now pops up as the candidate in Nadine Dorries' mid-Bedfordshire seat? He would certainly be elected. The Tory majority is 26,000 strong. And then he'd be back. Hey presto, a purged man, purged of any offence that he was being bagged for. I remind you that the offences he was bagged for were eating cake and drinking wine in proximity to his colleagues during a COVID crackdown, lockdown, now almost entirely discredited. One which he himself imposed, yes, but which is now regarded as one of the gravest political, policy, government mistakes of all time, which has wrecked the British economy, wrecked the mental health of many people in Britain, many of them in Parliament, it would seem. His transgressions would be purged if he came back as a Member of Parliament for a new constituency. It would be his first day back at work. I don't know if even Boris has thought of that one. But if this gives him any hint, I would say that he should do it. Because if there's one thing I loathe more than the blob that is Boris Johnson, it is the blob that is the Guardianista commentariat and their parliamentary representatives, who now number in their many hundreds, and the civil service blob that never accepted the key policy of Boris Johnson in the first place. And I know that many of you are not going to like what I'm saying, but I have to say it. In 1975, when I was the tea boy to the late and great Mr. Benn, the best Prime Minister we never had, I was running around the country fighting in the referendum to withdraw from what was then the European Economic Community. Some, like Mr. Shore, were more concerned with issues of trade and Commonwealth preference and so on. Mr. Foote was more concerned with the threat of membership to parliamentary democracy, and both were correct in every particular that they said about that. But for Mr. Benn, and by extension me as his young tea boy, 21 years of age, what mattered was this: if people are taking decisions on your part that you have not elected and cannot remove, you will ineluctably go along a yellow brick road into perdition. A perdition of a European superstate that will be run by unelected people whom you cannot remove, but who are taking decisions of such magnitude that as of now, they threaten the very existence of humanity. Never mind the economy or the society or the culture of the peoples of Europe, but their lives themselves. We are now being led by somebody called von der Leyen? Spell it, I dare you. Somebody called Joseph Borrell? Picture him in your mind, I challenge you. Right to the brink of nuclear catastrophe. One which will now be visited on all of the peoples of Europe and us in Britain. Even though we decided to Brexit, we are marching in lockstep with these European bureaucrats that we did not elect and cannot remove. And this evening, 250 NATO aircraft are parked on the runways, their engines burning around the Russian Federation. They are in Germany and they are in the so-called Baltic republics, the tiny principalities and statelets that represent the advance guard of NATO in the surrounding, the encirclement, the siege of Russia. And I'm here to tell you, not because anyone in Russia told me, I might not even be right, but it is my belief, and I've been right before, that if any of these 250 NATO aircraft enter Ukrainian airspace, if any of their warships enter Ukrainian waters, and if any of their soldiers place foot in the territory of Ukraine, a state of war, which will ineluctably become a nuclear war, will exist between NATO and Russia, and the whole future of humanity will be in peril. I warned back in 1975 that we'd end up with a Europe like this. Something else that I was right about. Fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy night because this is the mother of all talk shows.
The 1897 edition of War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. Read by George Galloway. Available only on Patreon.
The cylinder was artificial, hollow, with an end that screwed out. Something within the cylinder was unscrewing the top. Good heavens, said Ogilvy. There's a man in it, men in it, half roasted to death, trying to escape. At once, with a quick mental leap, he linked the thing with the flash on Mars. The thought of the confined creature was so dreadful to him that he forgot the heat and went forward to the cylinder to help turn. But luckily, the dull radiation arrested him before he could burn his hands on the still glowing metal.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Here's tonight's poll. Will Boris Johnson return and topple Rishi Sunak? A, yes. B, no. You can vote on my Twitter feed, on YouTube, on my Telegram channel, t.me/George Galloway, or on the YouTube community poll. 11,393 people have voted so far, and the show has only just begun. If you want to comment on anything I have said or didn't say, or anything you hear from our guests, here are the telephone numbers. In the UK and Ireland, entirely free of charge, it's 08 08196 5522. If you're in the US or Canada, again, toll free, it's +1 844 944 3344. And if you're in the possibly mythical rest of the world, It is 44203-966-2625. Now, I have never met Seymour Hersh, the most celebrated and recognized, decorated journalist of our era, but someone once on a Saturday night 30 years ago put a chapter of his through my front door in Battersea in southwest London. And the rest became parliamentary history, as those of you who've watched my mini documentary on my role in the downfall of Robert Maxwell already know. If you want to see it, it's on my Patreon now, it may even be on YouTube. It was a chapter of a book of enormous importance that Robert Maxwell had gone to enormous lengths to suppress. Hence the need to put a chapter through my door and my need under parliamentary privilege to publish the contents of that chapter, which I did, and which only weeks later led to the downfall of Robert Maxwell and his downfall from the end of a boat. Whether he jumped or whether he was pushed is something perhaps we will never know. But I had no compunction of acting on the words of Seymour Hersh, because being of the age I am, his work had, in the Vietnam era alone, illuminated so much that was important in my lifetime. Later, he would go on to illuminate much more, like the war crimes committed by the so-called coalition of the killing in Iraq, in Abu Ghraib, and other black prisons to which people were taken, in which they were tortured, oftentimes in the most horrific, sexualized manner. And therefore, when Seymour Hersh did one of his famous, if you'll forgive the pun, deep dives into the crime of the century, the blowing up of the Nord Stream pipelines, I listened carefully to what Mr. Hersh had to say. You'd be a fool not to. And now that he's here, finally, on the mother of all talk shows, you'd be a fool not to pay attention. Mr. Hersh, thank you very much for joining us. I'm honored to be interviewing you, and our audience is honored, I think, to hear what you've got to say. Now, before we turn to Nord Stream, I wonder if I might probe you on these war games, which seem to me to be assuming a greater importance. If you read between the lines, the Speaker of the Congress unexpectedly sent the members of Congress home a week early. The media is rather darkly hinting about the military prowess of all these NATO aircraft and other forces that are right now on the tarmacs and in the waters around the battlefield of Ukraine. Is there any possibility in your mind that NATO is about to join the war?
Well, it's probably already in it. I mean, in terms of training and advising, you know, there's so many disparate groups now in the Ukrainian army. Somebody once described this offensive, the reason why the current offensive is probably inevitably doomed, it's as if you had 15 different dance teams that have been practicing together or separately for a long time. And if you put them in the one big auditorium and said you have an hour or a day or 3 days to organize a routine among all of you, that would be impossible. And that's what's happening right now with the Ukrainian army. As far as I know, as far as I've been told, I'm not there. I haven't seen it. And many reporters aren't there. It sounds to me like it's carnage in terms of the Ukrainian offensive, which means that it's also carnage in terms of the NATO. It's probably the most important NATO operation that's been going on. I don't know what happens to NATO in the long run, but this isn't going to be good for Ukraine. It's not going to be good for NATO. It's certainly not going to be good for the Biden administration, what's going on now. So I understand.
Before I turn to other aquatic matters, what was your take on the blowing up of the the Kakhovka Dam. I think it's called Nova Kakhovka Dam just the other day. Did you accept the official narrative that the Russians blew it up?
You're asking somebody. You know, I write a column. I write once a week on something called Substack in America, which is a sort of an independent. I'm basically self-publishing, although I use the same editors and fact checkers I did when I worked for the New Yorker for 22 decades. I'm not ready to talk about it. I mean, I have an idea, and I think I know what happened, but I don't want to tell you right now. That's all. That's for me to write. But
okay, let's turn then. Let's turn then to what you have already written about, and which is in the public domain, namely the bombing of the Nord Stream. It seems to be settling as the official American mainstream narrative that it was not Russia that did it, which was what they initially wanted us to believe, but that Ukraine did it. And in the last day, that they did it from a base in Poland. Therefore, Ukrainians based in Poland did it. What do you make of that counter narrative?
The other part is that it was Ukrainian military units reporting directly to the equivalent to our chairman of the Joint Chiefs in America, the head of the military operations that are pretty fast and furious right now. And the head of this one-time actor, Zelensky, didn't know about it. That's the news story, that it was done by a Ukrainian group. And what can I say? Well, all I can tell you, it was a Joe Biden extravaganza. And all that happened is that the United States, and to some degree your country too, look, you're suffering from lack of gas right now, lack of cheap fuel. Since the Cold War, since containment, since the end of World War II, and we decided that the Western world decided that we had to contain Russia, et cetera, and China, containment. And they decided that one of the great weapons Russia had in this war of ideas and thoughts and power grabs was their gas and oil, and they were weaponizing gas. This became, I think the Kennedy administration was the first administration to start talking about the darkness of Russia's cheap gas being made available to Europe. And then about in 2011, the first pipeline, Nord Stream 1, was put into action, which gave Germany an amazing boost of cheap methane gas, very clean gas, more than they could use. There was so much gas that was began to drive. You know, Germany's a great industrial country, and even with this, the gas, the first pipeline provided so much gas that the Russians were actually the Germans actually set up companies, and they were afraid. In the phrase in the oil and gas business is they were selling it downstream. They were selling it to other small companies that serviced the rest of Western Europe, that much gas. And then, lo and behold, in 2021, a second pipeline had been built and was ready to be going into play in the middle of the Ukrainian battle. And the concern we had in Washington, the best understanding I have, and obviously, if one reads the story I wrote, it was on Substack, but it's been published all over that story. It's a long story with a lot of detail from sort of inside. And it actually was, we only did it with the help of the Norwegians, who would, Norway's been a great American ally in dirty tricks, if you will. They helped us a lot in Vietnam, early in the Vietnam War, and the Norwegian shipping industry has a great capacity to carry stuff that we don't want to carry ourselves for us. So there's been a long-standing tie. Norway supplied the ships. We supplied the brain power, I guess, and the idea. We also supplied some very highly qualified miners. And divers rather, from a base in Florida. And we work closely with the Swedes and the Danes, who somehow still pretend they don't know much about it, but that's their business. Norwegians have not talked about it. And we blew up the pipelines underwater on demand. It was done. The idea was initially, it's very funny. If you go back and look at the history of it, Biden, this idea originated in 2021 when it looked clear that the Russians were building up their forces in Belarus and on the border, and Putin was going to go in. He'd had it, as you know. We've been. I don't think anything justifies a war, but there certainly is a case to be made that we've been systematically lying to the Russian government, going back to 1990 when NATO was expanded, when Germany became one, West and East Germany became one country. West Germany was in NATO, and we wanted permission. We made a deal with the Russians that we would not expand not 1 inch further into Eastern Europe, into NATO East. And of course, we lied, and we expanded it enormously over the next 3 decades. And we've also put nuclear capable missiles on the border in 60, 70 miles from the Russian border in Poland. So all these acts, I think, shaped Putin's state of mind. And he's always had a great sensitivity about Ukraine. He needed Ukraine as a buffer against the West. And that was something that it was all predictable what happened. A lot of people knew if we kept on pushing, he would do something. Well, he did it. And so in December, the White House convened a meeting. I'm not a great friend of our State Department, Tony Blinken, the Secretary of State, and Jake Sullivan, who used to be a lawyer for Hillary when she was fighting all the problems with her pretty much questionable email, and Victoria Nuland, who's an arch conservative who is now Undersecretary of State. All three, I call them Wink and Blink and Nod if you've ever had children and read those children's stories. They're all part of a very narrow-minded, terribly anti-Russian group. And the question was how to stop Russia. And one of the ideas that emerged in meetings, I described pretty thoroughly in the article I wrote, meetings in the White House and meetings in the State Department. There were meetings about what to do, and one of the options was blow up the pipelines and let Russia know that we had that option. And so about 3 weeks or two, let's see, the pipelines were blown up. The war started on the 23rd of last year, 14 months ago, 15, 16 months now. And in February of 2012, with the head of Germany, Chancellor Scholz, with him, February the 7th, there was a news conference at which Biden was asked. There was a lot of talk about, earlier talk about doing something to the pipelines. They said, and the idea was, maybe to tell Putin, we're going to do this. And so you'll lose your pipelines if you start this war. One of the pipelines anyway, certainly Nord Stream 1, they own totally, only a part of the second one. Anyway, what happened is that Biden was asked that question about 2 weeks before the war began. And he said, we know how to do it. We'll do it if we have to. And at that point, it seems to me, you have to think maybe he really meant it, which I did, which made that story, once I began to learn what happened, much easier to find, because I knew where in the government they would do that kind of work. You needed a lot of skill in underwater technology, and you also needed sophisticated Navy people, and you needed the CIA and also people in other agencies that knew how to protect operations. And it was supposed to be blown up during a war game in June. The president said no. And then he wanted it blown up in late September of last year. And that's always the question, why then? And one of the things that I thought, and others thought too, was by late September last year, any notion of an early victory against the Russians, which may have been the belief that the White House had, there was an early victory to be had. We've been training the Ukrainian, NATO's been training them for years, and we've been supplying America a lot of arms to them. and they were a much better fighting force than they were a decade earlier. Maybe they thought it would be an easy win, but it wasn't. By late September, it was certainly looking like a long, drawn-out draw at best. And Biden decided to blow up the pipelines because I think the most logical explanation I have, it's not mine, it was given to me by people on the mission. That doesn't mean they had any firsthand information. Nobody talked to the president about this. But the thought was that Chancellor Scholz might have thought, with winter coming in September, he's better off keeping an option open. And the option being to walk away from a war, stop putting bad money into, good money after bad, because we wanted much more investments from Germany in the war, much more money. America spent something like $140 billion on this war at a time when 15 million Americans were taken off Medicare, free health care by this administration. I mean, what's going on in America, and this is just outrageous, that he's fighting a war he's not going to win. And he's into it. I think he thinks this is re-election. He feels the war is very popular. I think there's evidence showing this popularity is dwindling, particularly as the cost of subsidizing it goes on. And anyway, the bottom line is that I think Biden decided to do it, or at least the only reason it makes sense is to take away an option for Scholz, take away an option for Germany to decide they're done putting good money after bad, and they're going to look away. And by blowing it up, he's put, we'll see. There's the economy in Germany is on the verge. It's falling. It's not in dire straits, but the prediction is there's going to be a serious recession. And if it's a cold winter, last winter was quite mild. I remember pictures of ski resorts over Christmas having no snow in them in the Swiss Alps. And this winter, if the odds are will be a lot colder. There's going to be a great demand for gas. He doesn't have that pipeline. He doesn't have the ability to keep the machinery running, the great industrial fortress Germany is, and also to keep the people warm. Last year, he subsidized about 20 to 25% of the heating costs with cash in the German treasury. This year, he won't be able to do that. And so the option is to buy highly priced liquefied natural gas from us. We were charging, of course, 2 to 3 times the normal price last year for it. They may be able to get some liquefied natural gas out of China. Their economy is slowed down, and China's a big user of gas. As we all know, they're buying it from Saudi Arabia right now and paying in Chinese currency. It's a big blow to us in America. So we're looking at a fall that could be an economic disaster and a political disaster for Scholz. And he's being a good boy. He's keeping his mouth shut. He's not saying what he knows. I don't know if he knew in advance. I think he certainly has to know now what happened. The idea that a Ukrainian group of dissident divers could do it, it took the best divers in America, and we've been we're good at our divers are good at doing good things, clearing harbors of old sunken ships from World War II, et cetera, and also blowing up oil rigs we don't like in secrecy. I mean, these guys are good, and they practice. The idea that a group of Ukrainian divers could pull off something like this is just anybody in the diving. Look, the truth is people in the diving community know what happened, but they're not talking. I mean, I happen to know that there are, last year, building pipelines underwater, you've got a lot of gas and oil in Russia and other places, and getting it to the places that it's needed has always been a problem. Overland, you have to go through third countries. There's a Russian pipeline that still goes through Ukraine that's still viable even now, and the Russians are paying the portage fees right to this day. There's a pipeline that goes into Czechoslovakia, et cetera, former Warsaw Pact countries. That pipeline was started in the late 50s, early 60s, and it's been going on. But there's been a lot of problems. Ukrainians tapping into it, siphoning off oil, gas and oil. Anyway, it's an oil pipeline. Anyway, so the industry, I think last year there was 12,000 miles of pipeline built underwater. And I will tell you, I've told this to reporters, go talk to the people in the industry because they know who did it. I mean, I know they know, but I can't say how I know it. Just like it's not that I don't want to tell you what I know about the dike, but it's just something I'm in the process of writing, and there's a reason for everything.
Sure, I understand that completely. Of course.
Yeah, I should have told you.
As you were talking about the, as you were talking about the, shrunken nature of government in your country and in mine, I got to thinking about Nixon and Kissinger, who committed, of course, many, many crimes. You could say that at 100 years old, Henry Kissinger is absolute proof that only the good die young. But Nixon and Kissinger had a foreign policy of some sophistication, not the least of which was to do everything they could to keep China and Russia as far apart from each other as possible. Our leaders in this generation, the Blinkens, you won't believe it, but our foreign secretary's name is Cleverly, and if ever a man were inaptly named. But people like that in today's generation of policymakers, of statesmen, if you like, seem so much less than the people that we had before for all their sins and even crimes. Have you got a view on that? How did that happen, if you agree that it did?
Well, you're absolutely right. Right now, the paucity of intellect among the foreign ministers is just frightening and embarrassing. Your former leader was, when she was foreign minister, was I guess a comedy act at best. So we have there's what this sort of visceral, constant, perverse hatred of Russia, and nobody was more anti-communist in his career than Nixon, and Kissinger also. And yet they cut a deal with Russia. In 1972, they made a deal with missiles, and Russia repaid him by cutting back support from Vietnam. It was a very cynical deal. I think Nixon has, my view of Kissinger always is going to be that when he can't get this, I did the My Lai massacre story, the story when we killed 500 people. And by the way, when you say, are you worried about the criticism about my pipeline story? That story was when I wrote 500 people were killed in Vietnam and by American troops and raped and mutilated. That story was, oh my God, it took a year and a half. It was completely covered up. Ditto, I wrote a story about the CIA spying on American citizens, what we're not supposed to do. Unlike your services, you have your five that can do what it wants. But in America, our foreign intelligence cannot operate domestically. It took, I think, 4 months before that story got acknowledged. So this is all part of the game when you write stuff that's out of the league. But Kissinger always struck me. I've spent a lot of time looking at containment. I'm old now, and there was COVID. I had some project I was doing that it was hard to do. You couldn't travel. And I think the mistakes of containment after World War II were the gravest, really. I keep on thinking about how America got into the war in Southeast Asia, Vietnam, was a fear that if South Vietnam fell to the communists, we'd be fighting North Vietnam and the Chinese. It would be, that we intertwined all of that stuff. And I will tell you that we're coming up now in 2 years, this time of year, it's going to be the 50th anniversary of beginning the war, or when the war ended, the horrible scene in 1975 of Vietnamese clinging to the helicopters, the landing gear, the landing pods of them trying to get off from the American embassy as we were driven off by the communists. And so what happened then, when you think about containment, what happened then is we lost Vietnam in late April, early May, fell to the communists from North Vietnam. And not necessarily National Liberation Front, many of them were not communists. But anyway, they joined with the North. And then 2 weeks later, in Cambodia, the Khmer Rouge overthrew that government. We lost Cambodia 2 weeks after Vietnam. And then the other tripod that made up Southeast Asia for us, Laos fell to the Khmer Rouge a couple of weeks later. So within a month, and maybe a week and 10 days, we lost all of Southeast Asia to communist units. And the whole basis for going in was to fight the spread of communism and containment, the American policy of containment, with the Brits too. And so what happened? Somebody very wise asked that rhetorical question to me, and I sat there and listened. And he said, nothing happened. In fact, we're the largest trading partners right now in America with the Vietnamese, and we do business with the other countries. And so the whole post-war notion that we had to stop Russia and communism, and I'm sure Stalin was as crazy as you want to make anybody and paranoid as most of our leaders are. But still, you just start thinking that maybe we did so many things wrong. In any case, I view Kissinger, I can't help it, I view him as somebody when he can't go to sleep. The old cliche in America is you count little baby lambs. He's got to count little Vietnamese and Cambodian infants who were burned and maimed and killed before he can get to sleep. So I don't have any sympathy for him. I actually think Nixon was more astute in terms of foreign policy than Kissinger. He was more flexible, more willing to make a deal with the rotten communists in China and Russia to stop the war, which is what he did. He cut a deal with both. It's actually very shrewd stuff.
Why do you think, Mr. Hersh, that, and we both lived through it, why do you think there was so much more footage and reportage of the war in Vietnam with technology not a scintilla as powerful and ubiquitous as that which we have now, compared to the footage and coverage of the war in Ukraine? I don't myself watch a lot of mainstream television, but I'm sure I'd pick up if I was seeing the kind of battlefield footage and carnage and so on from Ukraine as I did as a young man of Vietnam. That has to be deliberate, no?
I don't know. I mean, that's a cosmic question for which I just don't have an answer. I will tell you there is available stuff. Some of the best stuff, alas, comes from Russian sources who cover the war much more enthusiastically than the West does. We have a lot of reporters in the American newspapers have reporters, but they're tied basically to the Zelensky regime. They work out of Kiev. They are taken to the front, but they're taken under controlled circumstances. There's no coverage of the other side because we don't go there. We don't go to the Russian side. I have seen footage of what's going on now. I guess mostly from Russian, but there's also some independence footage, and it's pretty ghastly what's going on now. It's a bloodbath for the Ukrainians, only because, as I said, you can't put 30 or 40, 50 brigades, all with different leadership, different manpower, different weaponry, and no joint training. You can't put them into a war together. It's just, it won't work. They don't support each other. They can't work together, and they can't work efficiently together. They can try. And so we're seeing units just being separated, isolated. I've seen some horrible stuff of some of the tanks behaving, the Ukrainian tanks behaving stupidly, really, if you will, following one into a slog, one in a row into slogs where they're all going to get destroyed. There's a lot of footage like that available, but it comes from sources that aren't trusted here in the West. And so this morning's newspaper, I haven't looked at the New York Times yet, but this morning's newspaper, the Washington Post, which is as good as a paper as we get these days, although what happened to the Western press, I worked at the New York Times for 7 years I was at the New Yorker and I was hired away. And believe me, the New Yorker is a much more pleasant place to work than the New York Times, but I thought I could do more at the Times. It publishes every day. And I went to work there for 7-8 years. And in Vietnam, I started doing the Vietnam War. I ended up involved with the Nixon stuff and the Nixon stuff and Watergate. And then I'm doing a lot of stuff about intelligence corruption and stuff like that. But when I went to the Times, it was a straight paper. I joined the New York Times because I was against the war, and they knew I was against the war. I thought it was awful, and I was writing a lot about it. I already done the My Lai stuff, and I had people inside who thought it was awful who were talking to me. And the Times would take my stories, and they would have the usual thing from Washington, talking about how things are going well, and have a piece for me right next to it saying no. But we're not getting the no right now. We're not getting and I will tell you, there's a big no going on right now. What's going on now is today's paper dealt with something about Putin being in trouble domestically. The oligarchs, many of them, who fled Russia with their yachts and their private planes are being sanctioned, and it's being effective. And many of them are crawling back into Russia with their money. They can't get to their boats and planes. They're embargoed or locked up right now as part of the sanction process, but they can certainly, they have passports, they can certainly move. They're coming back to Russia with their money. And so, yes, things are not as good as they used to be in Russia. But the idea that they're desperate is just wrong. They've been selling their oil at a discount price to places like India. And the world has the percentage particularly of the African and Central Asian and South Asian countries that have changed from being pro-America to being pro-Russia is really quite dramatic. That is much more than half the world's population supports Russia in the war, and not the United States. This was never the way it was. We've lost so much credibility in around the world, and so as the war goes on, we've just had Saudi Arabia cut a deal with Iran. We hate Iran. That's a big blow to us. And what does Iran do? Because Saudi Arabia is beginning to talk to them. We're talking about Sunni Shia. This is a huge change. The Sunni Shia connection was not there. It's happened, I think, because of Ukraine and dislike of the war. Saudi Arabia, by the way, is selling 25% of its oil to China, as I mentioned. But the Saudis immediately cut a deal, and the Iranians immediately responded by they have a lot of control in Yemen over the Houthi tribes, and the Saudis have forced the Houthis to cut back, and we're going to have a settlement in Yemen that we in America could never get. So we're getting pushed out. We still have, get this, 800 bases outside of America, 180 of them special forces, and that's just an astonishing number when you think how few your country has, how few Russia does, how few China does. We're talking about in China and Russia, single digits, just very few things outside. 800 bases, 250,000 people, military people in South Korea. And so we're lost in some sort of inability. Well, of course, we have a very conservative politics, but he's even losing excuse me. He's even losing support for the war. The economic cost is getting to people. The polls show that more and more people are worried about the economic costs. Like 62% are now worried about the war. And, I think Biden's stuck into a mold where he thinks the war is the ticket to be reelected. And it seems to me we're in for some real political problems here in America.
Lastly, Mr. Hersh, and I'm grateful for your time, we both cried, I'm sure, when Robert Kennedy was cruelly murdered in California on his way to the presidency.
Oh, we're talking about Jack Kennedy.
Robert, of course, both were cruelly murdered,
Bobby
but
Kennedy.
I'm sure we both cried at the murder of Bobby Kennedy. What do you think of his son's run for the presidency? It seems to be exciting rather a lot of people.
Well, I've talked to him a lot because he was initially would call me, just because I'm a journalist, about anti-vaccine stuff. I've always thought he was loony. I don't think it's going to go anywhere. I initially thought you were talking about Jack Kennedy, which is still... there's a lot more to know about that, too. I don't mean necessarily about the assassination, but about the politics of those days. No, I don't. I'm not a fan of Robert Kennedy. He started off anti-vaccine. He's getting popularity, and people are talking about him, but I'm not a fan. I'm just not a fan. I mean, I don't.
Okay.
I haven't talked to him.
Cool.
But he used to just go on and on about vaccinations, and that scared the hell out of me. I have a wife that's a doc and my daughter that's a doc, and I do think vaccinations are important, and he didn't, and so that's that. But look, America's
it looks
up
like
for grabs.
yeah, it's up for grabs. But the leader of the opposition looks like he's on his way to prison. It used to be a hallmark of a banana republic that the people in power put their principal opposition figures in jail. Is that what's happening now with the Mar-a-Lago charges?
I haven't talked to anybody. I probably could because I know some of the people, but I have this weird feeling about Trump that he's not going to be that easily knocked off. I know he did pay off some woman to stop talking about their sexual relationship, but and I know he just settled a case against some woman. He lost a $5 million case, some woman that he molested. And I look, anybody who did what he did to the Constitution is not. I'm never going to support, but I'm not sure. The truth is that, in my experience as a journalist, people take a lot of documents home. Period. I mean, I'm not sure. I think the case. I'm not justifying anything he did. I've just read the papers on it. I don't know anything more. It could be some of the documents were seriously important. And he's an impulsive, childlike character. And you cannot forgive a man for trying to overthrow the government, as he definitely was. So he doesn't deserve to be anywhere. But I think the case that's going to be the most important one is the one in Georgia, where he called up the head of the campaign and said, "Give me 12,000," or he wanted one vote more to win the race. And he did it on a tape recording, and he also made those calls elsewhere. That seems to me. But I don't see anybody. I don't see any savior for America coming. We don't have a Lincoln, Abe Lincoln, in somebody coming, or an FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. We don't have anybody coming to save us right now politically. There's nobody there that's going to change the world. Jack Kennedy was a lot more flawed than we know, but I just don't see it. I actually did have high hopes for Obama, but everything he said he was going to do, he was going to close the horrible prison we have at Guantanamo, that torture chamber that cost us more respect around the world than anything else we've done. A prison in which people go to and never come out. No habeas corpus, no under the Constitution, anybody who's in a jail has certain rights. All that was washed away. He said he was going to do something interesting and novel about Central America. I mean, about the Middle East. Gave a speech, a very famous speech in Cairo at the university there. Didn't do that. He didn't stop the war in Afghanistan. Actually, Biden did, to his credit. And then he had that terrible disaster where the bomb went off. But he did stop the war. He didn't do it the right way. He pulled out too many troops first, et cetera, et cetera. But at least he said, no, that's the only thing I really respect him for as president. He got some legislation through. But the real problem we have is there's nobody there. There's nobody coming up, nobody that we can all parties can revolve around. So we're going to have this incredible east-west, if you will, north-south, pro, Democrat, Republican. It's a total. There's no middle ground anywhere between what we call the left and the right. Neither one are quite right words. So America's in for a very tough time. The next election, whoever is running, I don't think it'll be Biden. I don't think he'll be there, but I don't know who's coming up that's going to be able to win over some of the Republican zealots. And so this is certainly a very, very bad time. Look, you guys are going through a very bad time too. You've had some awful leadership.
I was just about to say, Oscar Wilde said we were two peoples divided by a common language, but we are increasingly united by the paucity of our national leadership, and the two of them in double harness is a very significant reason why the world is as it is today. Seymour Hersh, you're a superstar.
I'll just say one more.
Everyone needs to follow you.
Let me say one more thing.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
I always looked at the parliamentary process as being a savior for us. I'm talking about decades ago. I thought we got to get rid of this this two-party system. But you've demonstrated to me forget it. That's not, it's not going to work. So we have to find some other way of running countries. If we could get rid of leadership, that might be great. Just get people who aren't leaders.
Or,
people who know how to...
Or even get a leader. Seymour Hersh.
They turn out to have,
Stack.
Anyway, enough going. Goodbye. Talk to you. I'm off.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Very
Bye-bye.
nice to talk to you. That was the one and only Seymour Hersh. I'm sorry I let it overrun, but I think you'll agree it's worth it. I'm in 60 seconds. Count them.
Many people today struggle with the common mainstream media consumer. These types of people are mindless zombies. Instead of living authentically, they feed off masking their true thoughts and feelings, doing nothing and criticizing those who actually do their research. These type of media consumer can be highly manipulative, so here are some golden standard clapbacks when they start with their propaganda. When they say you are too much for them, show them a mirror and tell them to look for less. Draw a diagram of where your business is and their business is to visually show them they are in the wrong area. When they say, please watch this clip from this reputable BBC journalist, remind them that there are no longer any reputable BBC journalists, and to instead watch the mother of all talk shows for some real journalism. The next time you encounter a brainwashed zombie, hold your head high and know their obsession to eat your brain is masking their jealousy of your confidence, your freedom in self-expression, and most importantly, your authenticity. Keep listening to learn more on the mother of all talk shows.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
A soldier speaks is speaking all right, and it is being heard all across Pakistan, all across the Pakistani diaspora, which together makes up 250 million people in the world, a very significant number of people in the world. And those that are in Pakistan are living in a strategically super important powder keg in the very center of one of the most sensitive parts of the global political scene. So what happens in Pakistan does matter to you, whether you like it or not. What has happened is that the legitimate Prime Minister of Pakistan, Imran Khan, was overthrown in an American organized regime change operation, a coup just like all the other coups. And as Imran Khan said, just in the last 24 hours or so, he was overthrown because of his disobedience, his refusal to obey American diktat vis-a-vis Afghanistan, vis-a-vis Russia, vis-a-vis China. I'm very clear about that. As someone who is not a supporter of Imran Khan politically, I know an American regime change operation when I see one. And when I saw the front page of the Police Gazette being brought back to Pakistan from their well-upholstered exile, mainly in London, and placed again in power in a country they had robbed blind for generations. I knew that I had no option but to speak out. But nobody speaks out more clearly than Fmr Major ADIL Raja, A Soldier Speaks, who joins me again now. Adil, thank you for doing so. Just bring us up to date on the events of the week, if you will, since we last spoke.
Well, thank you, George, again for the invitation. It's always a pleasure to be on your show. Pakistan is such an interesting place that in 1 week you can expect the entire things to turn around 180 degrees. Well, that 180 degrees is yet to come, but so much is dependent upon external factors in Pakistan, not really the internal factors. Reason being that the Pakistani economy is dependent upon the external aid. Pakistani, until the time you don't get why. Last week you asked me that why doesn't the military junta goes in and just impose martial law? Instead, it's a partial law right now, as Mr. Javed Jabbar calls it. Half of it, I mean, there are civil liberties in place, but till the time it does not hurt the military establishment's mood and their whims and their wishes. What's happening right now is that they're having serious troubles of starting from the very top. The Pakistan Army chief is having serious trouble. Asim Munir is having serious trouble controlling his own military, his own image. The latest news I broke today was that he has asked the family of the martyrs to come and rescue his reputation, which is not going to, which is I think a wasted task, but he's still going on ahead with it because he's unable to control his reputation, his image, and that image greatly is going to dictate whether he'll be able to control the military. And the military, in fact, is not only the 700,000 serving people or 1 million serving people, it is in fact their families as well, their ex-servicemen as well, who do not support him in whatsoever he is did. And right now, I think I was listening to Mr. SEYMOUR HERSH. What he was saying is that Joe Biden considers war as his chance of re-election, and I think that is what the Pakistani journals sold his administration for the regime change operation, that they are going to wage another war at Afghanistan, which I told you in our first program we did together that there are minerals inside Afghanistan which can be transported from Pakistan within a few hours to India, where the American corporations are investing, building their factories and trying to make it in order to make India the counterweight to China. And as an alternative to China, the Indians are their strategic partnership in this war against China, the next big war which they are working for. So the Pakistani general sold them that war. Maybe that's why they came ahead and supported the regime change operation. But they carried out gross miscalculation, not only the Pakistani generals, but I think the U.S. backers, their U.S. backers in the U.S. deep state as well, grossly miscalculated not only the popularity of Imran Khan, but more so the reaction by the Pakistani public. They did not expect this kind of a strong reaction, which is going on for 13 months now, and it's not stopping. Now, they've been able to control the domestic Pakistani media and even the social media by, putting people in jail, putting people or blackmailing people, abducting activists and journalists. Mothers, like my mother was abducted. We talked about it last week. They have abducted the biggest journalist, Imran Khan. He's nowhere to be seen, and he's in ISI custody. That's for sure. I've confirmed it through my various sources, and they are so shameful right now that they come out openly in the social media. The trolls who are in fact the serving officer then say, "Yeah, we've got him. So what can you do about it?" So they're silenced. They've silenced the dissent, but they were always worried about the reaction by the overseas Pakistanis, and overseas Pakistanis are now at the forefront of the resistance, and they are carrying out these mass protests, not mass maybe, but they're carrying out protests in the global capitals in Washington, New York, and London today, even in front of the Westminster. There was a huge protest. I covered that on my social media channels, although you know that the Facebook and YouTube took a business decision to ban my channels, but I am fighting them legally, but overseas Pakistanis are fighting back, and they're fighting back hard. And now so much is depending what's happening domestically in Pakistan on the overseas and on the external factors, because everybody is asking for political stability, and that is the thing which will lead to economic stability. IMF is not giving them the funds. If the Americans were supporting them, they can see now the disadvantage of supporting the military junta and the Pakistani generals. They have not fulfilled upon their promises. They must have promised them that they would be able to control the situation domestically. They'll bring political stability, and that will definitely lead to the economic stability. And for that, they need outside money. They've just presented a 50 billion rupees budget a couple of days ago, and they simply want that they want to more than half of that money has to come from foreign aid. So from where are they going to get that aid? IMF is saying no. The only other option is Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and China. Well, the Chinese have told them, the Saudis and the Emiratis have told them that, listen, enough is enough. Now you need to stop fiddling with the system, bring political stability. And there is no other way but to carry out general elections to bring political stability. And another very important thing is that all their efforts to break Imran Khan's party and to make a new king's party by Jahangir Khan Tareen have failed. The famous People's Party have right now the government, is 13 different parties. They're all fighting amongst each other, including the two biggest parties, the party of Mr. Nawaz Sharif, PMLN, and Mr. Zardari's party, Pakistan People Party. They've got their own infighting going on, a serious infighting going on. So they've failed to counter the phenomena called Imran Khan. And even right now, even those who oppose Imran Khan and who are in the government circles right now, in the establishment right now, they say that if an election is held, and that has to be held to bring political stability, and without political stability, no foreign aid is coming in, Imran Khan will again get 2/3 majority. Now that is big news right now, and I think that's about to bring a tectonic shift in the policy in Washington DC as well.
It's unlikely that Imran will be a candidate, because it seems obviously their intention to have him in prison by the time of the elections. I see that one of the charges against him is that he committed some crime or other on the remarkable date of the 30th of February. There has never, in the whole history of calendars, ever been a 30th of February. But Imran Khan's accused of committing a crime on that date. But laughable though that is, they clearly intend to have him behind bars. Is that the limit of their ambition, or are you still worried, as I am, that he might meet some accident in the corridors of the jail, the corridors of the court, the corridors of power?
Well, George, all their efforts, all their barbaric efforts, all their fascism have failed to bring about the desired results. The establishment, there is a serious infighting within the military establishment. The army chief is not in control of his own army, his own establishment. The proof is, I am the proof. I'm being provided their inside stories, the inside news, inside intelligence. Everything is being provided to me from people within, senior people within Asim Munir's establishment. Let me tell you that. How come the 99% of the news which I shared beforehand becomes reality? I've already shared 100 of news already that, all right, I told you this on this date, and exactly this is what happened. So think that it's, I agree, Pakistan is a very leaky place, but they always prided themselves to be the number one agency, the ISI, but the senior most circles within the ISI are leaking news to me, and I'm sharing it with public. The senior most circle within the military establishment are leaking news to me. Why? Because they care about Pakistan, because they do not believe what's happening in Pakistan is right for the people of Pakistan, because they do not believe in the policy of the generals who are serving their individual interest or the Western interest of certain circles of the US deep state. Even US deep state right now are fed up. Mr. Zalmay Khalilzad's statements cannot be taken lightly against the army chief. I mean, he's a senior policymaker, one of them, and he has openly called out for the army chief to go home. And he has already pointed out that there is serious infighting within the military, which I can confirm is true. They are still trying to, show everything as okay, but it's not okay. Coming to your question, that whether they'll be able to, now there are intense negotiations going on. I can just confirm you it's a process of give and take. Imran Khan is back in a very powerful position. I can just confirm this much to you at this point in time. And he's not going to take anyone's dictation. Rather, he's going to dictate terms. But it'll be, a method. It'll be something on the principle of give and take. At the end of the day, that is what politics is all about. But we're just hoping that the Pakistani national interest is not compromised. And I don't believe Imran Khan is going to make a compromise on that. There is one circle which now believes that Americans have now realized that what a grave mistake they have made by supporting the military junta and believing in their words that they'll be able to control it. Now, I've always told you, George, that it's unprecedented what's happening in Pakistan. In 75 years of Pakistan's existence, never ever the people of Pakistan have resisted like this to the military establishment the way they're resisting now. So it is unprecedented, and unprecedented times call for unprecedented measures. So I can just confirm you that there are intense negotiations going on, and within maybe in our next Sunday show or the next, we'll be able to see things turning around 180 maybe, or it might will seem like that. But let me tell you that no matter what they've done, Imran Khan is still standing strong. Yeah.
Major Raja, thank you as always for joining us. See you next week, God willing, with good news. I hope your prediction comes to pass. Will Boris Johnson return and topple Rishi Sunak? Well, on Twitter, it's yes 44%, no 56%. On YouTube, it's yes 38%, no 62%. On the Telegram channel, it is yes 36%, no 64%. On YouTube community, it is, where 10,000 people nearly have voted, it is yes 33%, no 67%. 13,971 people have voted. Get voting right up until the end of the show, and on the YouTube community poll, you can vote even longer. I'm in the unusual position of telling the majority of people who have responded to this poll, I believe you've got it wrong. Boris will be back, and he will topple Rishi Sunak. Mind you, how do you topple someone that small? Their center of gravity is so low, it must be difficult to knock them over. Now, every time I make these sizist comments, I'm reproached by the lovely legend that is Norma in Bristol. And it is my duty to inform you that Norma has had an accident, quite serious fall, and she's been in hospital for the last week. So she is on Twitter, FagashFlow, one of the most brilliant names on Twitter. Please send her your good wishes and your hopes that she is back on the airwaves with us soon. There she is. That's Norma, the legend in Bristol. She's in hospital. I don't know which one yet. If I get notice on that, I'll let you know. So you can all send cards and your prayers and good wishes to Norma. Let me take a quick break, and then I think it's your show right up to the end. Stay tuned.
And it's a very, thank you for, I'm a big fan of your show, Gigi. Great debate, great. And I'm Scottish. I'm very passionate about what's happening there, I had a great mom. She was Scottish, Mary McLeod. She taught me well. She taught me well at everything, including golf. I love Scotland, and I love the Scottish food. It's great food. I said to Melania, haggis. Look at that. What's more Scottish than that? Me. I am that haggis. She said, what, thin-skinned and full of crap?
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Now, you all know the difficulties that our friend Roger Waters had in Germany and elsewhere. On Moats of Deutsch, our German channel, there was a fascinating discussion this evening. If you can follow German at all, I really recommend it to you. It was an interview with the George Galloway in Germany, Dr. Dieter Dehm, with the legendary German concert promoter Hermio Klein, who put Germany on the rock and roll map. Actually, he organized, promoted concerts: Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix, Rolling Stones, the Led Zeppelin, the late and great Harry Belafonte, the Who. He brought them all to Germany, and in his talk with Dr. Dieter, he explained his experiences with the cancel culture in Germany. And if you can follow German at all, I promise you'll find it very, very interesting indeed. Please bookmark the show, Moats of Deutsch. And if you know anyone who speaks German, please put the show in front of them. Now, Patreon, let me say that you can listen to the audio-only version of Moats on our Moats podcast, and the numbers on that are going through the roof. In recent weeks, it's been the #1 political podcast in Benin, Jordan, the Gambia, Qatar, Jamaica, Ghana, Iceland, Malaysia, Singapore, Sweden, and the Philippines. #1 political podcast in all those countries. Truly, truly phenomenal. Do you know that the BBC News has lost 40% of its audience in the last 2 years? It's official. 40% of its audience in the last 2 years have left BBC News. And of course, that is the sensible thing to do. Anyone with any sense has already left it. But to get people to tune in and change course and listen to a radically different point of view is even more difficult. But it's happening. And the numbers that we are racking up are now in their millions. I don't know the last 7 days' numbers yet. I'll give you them on Sunday. But the week before, it was 3,028,000 people had watched all or part of the mother of all talk shows in one single week. How about that then? Now, let's go to the lines. Let me just say, on the Moats podcast, you just search Moats with George Galloway on Apple, Spotify, Google, or whichever platform you listen to your podcasts on. Let's go to the lines. Quebec in Canada, where there are wildfires burning. Yasser is on the line. Yasser, what would you like to say?
Mr. Galloway, first I'd like to express my appreciation for everything you've done for Pakistanis across the world, native and diaspora, especially harking back to April 9th, 2022, the date of the Operation Regime Change. The question I have is that since I'm talking to the champion in this regard, how can Pakistani diaspora in particular, I'm going to focus on them today, how can they turn their movement, which hitherto remains disorganized, into organized, which remains ineffective into effective, from passionate to potent, from random to smart, when it comes to getting the desired result, which is to reverse this Operation Regime Change, which is to name and shame the global players that effectuated it, that supported it, that somehow facilitated it, including, unfortunately, your government having been the quintessential Me Too in this regard. It's because, as you're well aware, and you were part and parcel of it, the Palestinians launched BDS. If they were just going outside the homes of certain politically connected or politically exposed personalities, they wouldn't have gotten this far. And it's one of the most persecuted peoples in contemporary history. Yet BDS, from an unarmed global phenomenon, it turned it into a tool what are the tools, tips, techniques that you think Pakistani diaspora can harness? How can you educate them?
Well,
not just in this
it's most kind of you. I don't think I can educate them. BDS was a tactic that emerged from the Palestinian people themselves. Ditto the boycott of apartheid South Africa, in which I'm so old I was also deeply involved in. These are things that must come organically from the people. People outside, particularly non-Pakistanis outside, cannot dictate tactics. So, for example, the issue of remittances, that would obviously be one tactic. If everyone outside stopped sending their remittances in, the economy of Pakistan would sharply deteriorate, even beyond the deterioration it has already suffered. But I do not know if that is what the people inside Pakistan want people to do, and it would be entirely wrong for me to try to lead people down a path that was not coming organically from the people. So it is incumbent on someone who fights imperialism, as I do, to listen to the victims of imperialism and give solidarity and support to them. All I will say is you sound like the sort of chap that would be ideal to organize all the coordination that you were calling for there. Eloquent, educated, and safe, at least from political harm, if not from the forest fires there in Quebec, in Canada. I would only make this plea to you, and that would be to keep the demand simple. A free and fair general election now. I think the more you elaborate demands, the more you turn it into a restore Imran Khan to power, then by definition you're going to lose people at the edges. So a simple demand, a one-clause demand, a free and fair democratic general election in Pakistan now. Who could oppose such a demand? I don't think many could, credibly. Yasser, thank you in Quebec. Let's go to Janine in California. Go ahead, Janine.
Hey, George, can you hear?
Yes, very clear. Go ahead.
Okay. First, I want to say I'm in total solidarity with all people that are oppressed in the Middle East and everywhere. But I wanted to talk about RFK, and I think that RFK is going to be put in Biden's spot. And I think that because of first, the way he decided to run in a party that he could never, ever win. Like, it's not an election to win, and he knows that. And it just made no sense whatsoever for him to do that. But a week ago Friday, when the laptop stuff came out, it had some of the most incriminating things on it, but it seems to be ignored more. And I think that is because it was implicating people like Obama's daughter, and that stuff is just getting too close to them. And they're starting to tear him down in social media. But they're doing it with financial stuff, not the sex stuff that it should be. And they're starting to tear it down. And I think for sure that is what's going to happen. I think that RFK and DeSantis will be the candidates, and I think RFK is going to get stuck in there.
Well, I mean, I very much hope so, but I can't say I'm in any way as certain as you are, Janine. I'll go this far with you, and I note that Seymour Hersh also agreed with something I said a couple of weeks ago, if not a week ago, maybe two, that Joe Biden will not be the candidate in 24. It is beyond, way beyond absurd that this man can run for another 4-year term, even if he did not have all the allegations that are now agglomerating around his head. And you alluded to some of them. And coming out of the Congress now, we hear stories that the FBI have documentary proof that not just Hunter Biden on behalf of the big guy, but the big guy himself, who turns out to be unarguably Joe Biden, then the vice president, receiving millions of dollars, $5 million in one case, in corrupt money, dirty money that was never declared, on which no tax was ever paid. Now, these things, as you say, are beginning to emerge on top of all the licentious, drug-fueled filth on the laptop. These things are now beginning to emerge. So I'm absolutely convinced that Joe Biden will not be the nominee. I very much doubt if the powers within the Democratic Party will allow it to be Bobby Kennedy, because Kennedy's platform of his attitude to the conflicts with Russia, with China, the question of Julian Assange, the question of lobbying and the military-industrial complex, and perhaps most significantly of all, his attitude to the FBI and the CIA would make it much more likely that they would kill him than allow him to become the Democratic nominee. I think the man to watch out for is Governor Newsom in California, a kind of younger, more handsome version of Joe Biden. But we'll see. We're in agreement, Janine, at least on this. It won't be Joe Biden. Livia is in Florida, wants to talk about Epstein's Island. Let's hear what Livia has to say. Good evening, ma'am. What would you like to say?
I'm curious as to why no one talks about who he supposedly bought the island from.
Tell us.
I thought you might know.
No, I don't know. I think he had it for a long time. Is there any significance in who he bought it from?
I would think.
Well, let's see if the audience know. If anyone out there knows where Epstein bought the island from, let us know. I thought you were going to raise what I think is the more pertinent point. Maxwell is in jail. Epstein has been murdered. But who were these underage girls, and maybe even boys, who knows, being trafficked to? You can't be a sex trafficker if there's no customer. Who were the customers? And which intelligence agencies were the tapes being made for? These are big, big subjects. Livia, thanks for ringing. I'm sure you've set a hair running, and even now people will be hitting the keys on Google and elsewhere, and we may, by the end of the show, get an answer to your question. I rely on my supporters on Patreon. God bless you all, each and every one of you. And one of the things you can do is send me a comment if you are a Patreon. So thanks for searching for me on patreon.com/George Galloway. We've got 3 new patrons this evening: William Schul, Thomas M, and Clara Castro. Thank you very much indeed to all 3 of you. And we've got 1 new Moats graduate, Dr. McKilly. Thank you, Doctor, for that. And we've got a new Moats legend. Ta-da! We need news, a drum roll. We need music for this. A new Moats legend, Kendrick Song Liu. I really take my hat off to you, Kendrick. Thank you so much. Paul McDonald says, they are, as you say, George, 2 cheeks of the same arse. God help us all. Can't wait to hear Mr. Hersh. Love to your beautiful wife and family. Thank you, Paul. Graham Briggs-White, who is a Moats legend, says, I do not really think Boris will return, but nothing would surprise me. None of this parasitic political class are held accountable for anything, and Tony Blair should be being held in an Iraqi jail. Thank you, Graham. Cherie Slaboda says it's hard to judge which one is worse for the country. Indeed. And Quack Quacks says Sunak is just another wet piece of SH-1T to be maneuvered by the deep state into a position to be flushed away. Essentially, both stooges and upper gaslight mantles to shine a bit of false light on anything. Back to the line. Sarkar, my old friend, is in Glasgow. Wants to talk about the dam attack that Mr. Hersh wouldn't talk about. Go ahead, Sarkar.
Hi, George. First of all, please call yourself the University of Knowledge instead of the college, because your show is the university is like the ultimate place for knowledge. It's not just a college anymore. Believe me, George. So,
very kind.
George,
very kind.
My question is with regards to the dam attack, and perhaps it's much more serious than that, because I'll tell you, it's not just the dam attack, it's the misinformation surrounding that. Very few journalists and people like you told us way before in advance that the Nord Stream attack was not done by Russia. If they had to turn the gas off, they won't bomb their own pipeline in which they've invested their own money. They can just switch on and off the things from their own offices. This dam has been attacked in such a place which for almost 3 centuries has been a part of Russian territory. If Russia had to destroy that dam, why will they destroy the dam which is built on their own territory? Is it like, and how can people keep on selling this narrative? The Ukrainian government kept quiet on the Nord Stream for a long, long time. It's only when they were exposed with their hands in the sweetie jars, they just digress from the topic and not a word is mentioned about the Nord Stream attack. Now you thought they would learn their mistake, but now they've started the dam attack thing, blaming the Russians. If my neighbor's TV is making noise, I won't break my own TV. I'd rather go and tell him, stop your own TV or break his TV. That's the analogy which is being used over here. Why would Russia destroy their own dam which is in their territory? And how long can the West keep on peddling the false narrative? Because misinformation is the biggest crime, much more bigger crime than wars, because that leads to wars, George. I'd like to hear your views on that.
Well, it's brilliantly expressed. No need for me to add very much to it. Everything you said was blindingly, obviously true. All I would say is that it's all subject to the laws of diminishing return, with each chipping away at the credibility of the liars and the lying lies that the liars lie to us. Fewer people believe them next time round. So now that nobody, not even the Americans, are claiming that the Russians blew up the Nord Stream pipeline, even though they all said so at the beginning, now nobody says so, and that is in less than a year, then when you come to ask the same public to believe that, well, they didn't blow up their own pipeline after all, but they have now blown up their own dam, damaging the interests of their own soldiers and their own compatriots and their own land, and cut Crimea off from its water supply, a principal weapon and goal of the Kiev coup regime ever since 2014. As I said last week, Sarkar, you really have to be a grade 1 idiot to believe that. You don't just have to be gullible, you don't have to be naive, you have to be a grade 1 idiot to believe that. And actually, although there are a lot of grade 1 idiots, there are far fewer than there used to be. And that's why actually, within a few days, the allegation that the Russians done it has begun to, if you'll forgive the pun, ebb away. It's quite obvious that the Ukrainian blowing of the dam was the first shot in the much vaunted, but not very successful so far, counter-offensive. It was the flag, it was the signal to begin the counter-offensive. It's kind of obvious. Now, I don't actually blame idiots, because idiots are idiots. We're always going to have them. Who I blame are the liars. The people who systematically lie to the idiots, know that they're lying, but keep lying anyway. They do it for pay, I presume, or for ideological reasons, but probably they're doing it for pay. Thanks, Sarkar. On YouTube, Patrick Foley says, our Prime Minister of Canada states unequivocally that Russia blew it up. and he's sending a further sum of $500 million and weapons. Our Prime Minister is a college graduate with a Bachelor of Arts. Well, his country is literally on fire. And where is he? He's in Kiev, paying tribute at the court of King Zelensky. The projected forecast cloudy with a chance of rain, with question about the island. The question should be, who has now purchased Epstein's Island? And is it someone who has done business with Epstein? Two good questions, actually. Oliver Law 02 says, what's the difference between Putin and a TV license inspector? I'd let Putin in the house for a chat. Brilliant. On the line is a Rose in Texas. Sounds like the beginning of a song. On Californication, which is a song. Rose, welcome to the show.
Good evening, George. I'm a fan of the show, transgender fan of the show, and I wanted to briefly address your monologue from last week on Californication, because I almost entirely agree with what you said. Trans women athletes taking medals and records, directing children at nightclubs, and even going to elementary schools themselves, not to mention hormone blockers for children as well. The attack on freedom of speech, not only against conservatives, but anyone who doesn't fall in line with the agenda, rainbow flags on NATO military aircraft, which is certainly doing more to cultivate anti-queer sentiment around the world than there already is. All of that makes me sick. So because I don't believe in incest, bestiality, necrophilia, and pedophilia, I'm basically culturally right-wing by today's standards, even though less than 5 years ago, I'd still be left-wing. So in regards to you and everyone else watching who thinks of me and people like me as the villains right now, you should know that I support the most traditional Muslim, Jewish, Abrahamic believers to be as homophobic and transphobic as they want, because guess what? That's freedom of religion, which is a value we claim to have in the West. Now, my religion, I suppose, is I believe I'm a woman, but guess what? Not everyone has to convert to my religion. Otherwise, we basically have a theocracy, only this theocracy is for the ever-evolving LGBTQIA supercalifragilisticexpialidocious club. So that's all I wanted to get out of my system. Thank you.
Well, Rose, if I could put your call in a glass bottle and ship it around the world, I promise you that I would do so. Crystal clear, beautifully expressed, and I wish you every happiness in life. It is exactly what people who are transgender should be saying. And if they were, they would disappoint the liberal zealots who want to use them as a battering ram against the traditional family values of the rest of us. Beautifully expressed, Rose. I'll never forget it. An email from Tony to onair@moats.tv tonight says, George, a week after Germany entered recession, the Eurozone entered recession too. How are those sanctions working out now? Every financial parameter shows the Russian economy performing better than any European or Anglosphere economy. Tony, beautifully, perfectly, succinctly, accurately expressed. Kevin is on the line in Suffolk on Boris Johnson. Kevin, thanks for calling. What would you like to say?
Yeah, hi George. And also, yeah, I echo what you said about the call from Rose. That was pretty amazing and very brave.
Beautiful, right. It was, very beautiful.
It was, yeah. Okay, so Boris Johnson. So I had a great deal of hope in 2019, and I listened to criticisms of people like Michael Portillo, who, you know, otherwise I've got a bit of time for, and obviously, you know, completely, I've said to you before, I probably have to define myself as small c conservative. Economically, I can be persuaded of you know what the best system is, but I thought Boris was Trump with brains, you know, because Trump is an absolute maniac. I mean, you know, but Boris like surprised me at the dispatch box because he wasn't. Once, you know, Starmer isn't exactly like you know, Jim Callahan or something, or Dennis Healy, but you know,
Boris couldn't prevail at the dispatch box. I thought he'd be good on his feet. I thought he'd be a good debater, but he wasn't. And obviously, like, COVID completely knocked him for six, or knocked, everything for six, and there's a big inquest about that separately, but he couldn't rise above it, I don't think. And he allowed, this mob to metastasize and like take back control, to coin a phrase, and like.
Yeah, but let me interrupt you for a minute, Kev. I'll let you back in. I would just make this point. Boris Johnson came in to get Brexit done. As it happens, we haven't really Brexited at all. We've got all of the negatives that you could expect from Brexit, and none of the positives that we ought to have been able to expect and could, and I hope one day will be able to enjoy. But he came in to get Brexit done. The entire civil service, the entire political class, the entire media class, all of the deep state did not want Brexit. And I don't think that Boris Johnson ever recovered from that mismatch. Last word to you, Kev.
Well, I mean, absolutely, yes, I agree. And also, he had the 3 years or whatever it was under that absolute, I don't know what, Mrs. May, what in God's name she was trying to do. But
God, I'd forgotten about her.
Well, I mean, I agree, right? What chance did he have? But he, without. I mean, I'm not even getting to the point that I wanted to make, really. But basically, I think his political instincts are not that great because, he's gone down the road of this green stuff. He was wrong, massively wrong on Ukraine. I mean, the thing to do on the real statesmanship thing to do on Ukraine was to say, look, stop shelling the Russians in Donetsk. I mean, that would have been the thing to do before the war started.
Sure. And he could have done it. He could have done it. He could have been. He could have shown. He could have shown that Brexit Britain was the place that would shuttle around negotiating settlements and peace in the world. He could have been the one that brought Saudi Arabia and Iran together. He could have been the one that stopped the Ukraine-Russia conflict from breaking out. Instead, he did absolutely the opposite, Kevin.
The thing is, George, if I can, I know I'm not trying to hog the time, but he was in a situation where, we could have done a deal. There was a deal to be had under Trump. Wherever you think about Trump, and I think he was the wrong, I understand why they voted for him, but he's the wrong man for what they wanted to do. The American citizens, I mean. But there was a deal to be had when, by the time he took office, actually, I'm not sure if I got my timeline right, but I mean, basically, once Biden took over, we had a hostile president in the US who basically doesn't like Britain, and I think he's at one point said that he saw Boris as like the British Trump. I mean, we had to. I mean, I think this is why he pioneered this thing with Ukraine, because like he had to come up with something that we could appear as leaders in, that would seem to carry moral weight with the rest of the West. And I don't agree with it, obviously, but I think partly that's why he did it, because he wanted us to be seen as leaders in something. I mean, there is real politic involved. I mean, we were completely isolated because we buggered up Brexit so badly, or May did, Anyway.
But what he's done is, you are. But what he's done is do what all the European Union leaders have done. And all of them together have done exactly what Joe Biden wanted them to do. So who's independent? Who's sovereign? Who's got any sense? Who's the grown-up in this situation? Thanks, Kevin, for that call. Tim Duddy on YouTube thinks Johnson had his chance, but he left so many of his supporters bitterly disappointed. The future looks very bleak for UK citizens, I'm sorry to say. Tim, you're right about that. Hanny say, will Boris succeed? No, but like Trump, Johnson will return. Rashid is on the line from California. Is it Rashid Sanook? Go figure. Rashid, welcome.
Hi, George. I think I'm a little taller than that guy. Earlier, you spoke of...
That's not difficult, Rashid.
Earlier, you spoke of a paucity of talent in political circles.
Yeah.
My point of view is that over the last 3 decades, statesmen have been replaced by yes men. And since that time, our nations have careened in directions that are not only out of alignment with the needs of the people, but instead on trajectories that are almost suicidal, putting the very survival of the nation state in question. And now democracy in the United States has been wobbly for decades, but the events of the last few years have made even the most strident believers in the state to question its validity. And the same can be said of the United Kingdom, where you have not only suffered through multiple unelected prime ministers, but fifth columns tearing down Jeremy Corbyn and other leaders of Labour before they even had a chance shot at the prime ministership. If you recall, somebody we both admire, Mr. Kennedy, said in 1961, he had a great speech where he spoke of secret societies. In the United States, it's kind of well understood that our politicians are beholden to the big commercial banks. And then thanks to 1913 and the creation of the Federal Reserve, we now have monstrosities such as BlackRock and Blackstone that basically own all of the publicly traded major companies who are happy to shut down the small business at the drop of a hat. And these people, as you can see with the disaster for Anheuser-Busch, have major inordinate influence on the social and public dialogue. So my question to you is, who do our political leaders really follow? Who is in charge and where are they taking us?
Well, it's a brilliant call and a brilliant question. And there isn't enough time left to properly answer it, even if I had an answer. And truthfully, in totality, I don't. I agree with you entirely about the shrinking and shrinking and shrinking of our political class. I put that down to the death of ideology, the death of big ideas, the destruction of the possibility that another world was possible, an acceptance of the prevailing orthodoxy, which became a dictatorship of the prevailing orthodoxy, a dictatorship that said that neoliberal economics at home and imperialist politics abroad were the only option available, that you could paint yourself pink or rainbow colored and run that society, or you could paint yourself blue and run that very same society. Tweedledee, Tweedledum, two cheeks of the same ass, but no difference between them, and the same stuff coming out, if you'll allow me to pass on the rest of that metaphor. It was all effluent for the mass of the people in your country and in mine, and therefore why would you not have a shrinking of the political class? In your country, I think your republic was murdered on Elm Street in Dallas in 1963. I don't think you have ever recovered from that, and I don't know that you ever will. In our case, we had people of the caliber of Mr. Benn, of whom I've spoken, who never made it to be Prime Minister, and even quite a long way down from Mr. Benn, but Jeremy Corbyn, who would have been a very different kind of Prime Minister to those that we have had. But he was brought down by that fifth column. to which you refer. I see now in the papers the very people who did everything they could to destroy Jeremy Corbyn and thereby put Boris Johnson into power, bewailing all the venalities and faults of the man, Boris Johnson, that they put into power because they could not stomach the idea of a socialist in number 10 Downing Street, of someone who would not, at least I hope not, have danced to the tune of Joe Biden's drum. And these are all if-onlys. These are all would-have, could-have, should-have. And we'll continue to pick over them. But, you know, in the end, that's of academic interest, because we're here now. We are where we are. We can't invent a new country to belong to. We cannot invent new compatriots to follow us. We have no choice but to be in our own country now and to persuade, convert, and seek to lead our own compatriots now. That means we need to find a language in which to talk to them, an iconography which can rally them, and a political vocabulary, a political program, simple one, around which the maximum number of people can join, and thereby eschew unnecessary adornments, initials, acronyms, new stripes on that flag that can only divide us, can only divert us, can only be a digression which can only suit those that are already rich and powerful. When I saw on the Pride Parade in, I think, San Francisco, McDonnell Douglas, the arms masters of war, with their company banner done up in whatever is the latest incarnation of that banner, I got to thinking how successful it's been for our rulers to divide us all into all these different segments based on race, culture wars, sexual orientation, gender, and all the other identity politics things that are cast like bread in front of the ducks on the water to set them all ducking and diving and squabbling with each other. That is, I believe, Californication. It came from your country, but it has spread across the whole world, and we must find a way to rise above it. I've gone way beyond my time. I've thoroughly enjoyed this show, the mother of all talk shows. I hope that you did too, and if you did, please come back on Wednesday, where, God willing, at the slightly later hour of 9 p.m. UK time, I will be bringing you the midweek mother of all talk shows. Mind how you go. Good night and good luck. Bring me another viewer next week, please.